Sure. I spent the beginning of my career working on mobile and communications technologies, both in the government and venture capital, investing in emerging communications technology. And transitioned from there to healthcare, have an MD and a PhD in pharmacology from Emory, and did my clinical training in OBGYN. And decided to leave clinical medicine and focus again on innovation, but now in the healthcare sector, and did some work in venture capital before starting RIMIDI. So I was working with a venture capital group that was talking to Fortune 500 companies about what drives their healthcare cost. And some of the expected usual suspects there, cancer, preterm birth, but I was really surprised that chronic diseases like diabetes were a top five healthcare cost for all of these corporations. And I had the C-level suite from companies like Delta talking to me about diabetes, which as a clinician didn't make any sense to me. If we know how to manage those diseases, how could we do such a poor job? And when I looked into it, really decided it was an execution problem. We weren't using data effectively to manage the disease in the way that we should be able to. So Rimidi's product is a software platform that focuses on the whole spectrum of what's needed in diabetes management, from patient self-management to population management to clinical analytics for providers. So we share data across that spectrum, patient-generated health data that comes from sensors and devices and wearables, as well as the electronic medical record data that we pull from the EMR systems. And then we perform the analytics on that data to give the right insights and actions to those end users. Sure. So a couple of problems we're addressing there. One is there are these general population health tools that have been implemented to really help define populations and cohorts of patients within a system and help that system understand where their pain points are. But defining population health doesn't solve the problem. As someone put it to me last week, it doesn't change the clinical workflow to know what the problem is in your population. So RIMIDI's really digging into that. So our predictive analytics both help the health system know how to prioritize and triage the patients with a particular health condition so they know where to spend their time. But then at the individual patient level, we let them see the anticipated impact of treatment decisions. So we're short-circuiting this trial and error process of handing a patient a new prescription, waiting 6 months for them to come back and see what happened, and then iterating on that decision again. And we're allowing all of that iteration on screen in front of the clinician so they can make a much more targeted decision about patient treatment right there. Exactly. Yeah. So on screen, you can interact with that patient's data set and look at the anticipated outcome of treatment decisions you want to make. Yeah. So as a physician or as a nurse practitioner or other mid-level care provider, who are a lot of the clinicians who we work with, I'm able to visualize the most likely glucose profile of this patient based on the data that this patient's been monitoring at home. So RIMIDI is connected in to their Bluetooth-enabled or cellular-enabled device. We're connected to technologies like HealthKit and other data aggregators. And then we do the modeling to show here on the screen what the most likely glucose values are at each point during the day. And those are represented by these colored dots. And now as I interact with the medications that the patient's taking, and for instance, increase the amount of insulin that they're taking, you'll see that the whole graph shifts in response to that intervention. And so I can visualize the impact of that not only on their blood glucose, but on their hemoglobin A1C, which is a long-term measure of glucose control. And that's quite important to the patient because we're helping that patient also connect the dots between what I'm telling them today as their clinician and what in my mind the anticipated outcome is. And if we can help patients understand that, really understand what the goal of their therapy is, we can also impact things like adherence and engagement. Sure, I think the friction between a small company like ours that's innovative and a big company like Cerner is always going to be speed. So we can do things and on a dime, and they can't, and that's just their reality. We were one of the first companies to come into their marketplace, and so there were a lot of processes still being put in place in terms of the agreements and the legal side of it that held it up longer than we wish it had. But we understand that they need to standardize. That's the goal of these marketplaces. There's really a standard process for companies like RIMIDI. What's been exciting has been to help them drive what some of that process looks like. And the fire resources they had available when we started have been greatly expanded, and we've been able to have input on that and help them understand how to improve on the workflow that they supported initially to make that better and better for their end users. I think the biggest challenge right now is always been market timing for us. First we need the platform companies to get on board, and then we need enough of their clients to be ready and actually be interested in deploying Fire. And that's finally happening this year. I think 2017 will be the year where Fire will become a reality in the marketplace, not just for early adopters, but for the general market. Part of that is, driven by Meaningful Use 3 requirements and the deadline coming up in January, where a lot of the companies are leveraging Fire to fulfill some of those requirements. We're now leveraging what we've done with Cerner and with Athena, and we're building that out across other Fire platforms with the great hope that there will be minimal customization that needs to happen as long as everybody's complying with the spec. It's early to know that. It's early to know at the individual customer sites how consistent Fire resources will be as far as availability, and will that differ from health system to health system in terms of what they're allowing. And then authentication is always the pain point. I should have said that earlier, that the Fire integration and exchanging of discrete data points is pretty simple. The requirements around authentication, not just with the EMR company, but with the individual clients, is definitely the heavier lift. So the response has been really terrific of having our capabilities embedded in the EMR. And I often say to people, I'd like for physicians to not even know we exist. I'd like for them to think, wow, look what a fantastic feature Cerner has added. And so we're responding to that great feedback and saying, okay, how can we do this with other disease states? We're rolling out a congestive heart failure capability shortly, and we'll continue to expand that across other chronic disease states. Thanks.